So now that we've covered over what the graphical characteristics that we're interested in, let's just go ahead and tie this all together into a graph. So I've got a new graph here, and basically just a series of questions that kind of go over what we have basically been talking about. So again, we're essentially grabbing functional information from a graph. So for all intents and purposes, this is a graph of f of x. Okay, and the first thing they're asking for is what is the domain of the function. So again, we're looking along the x-axis, right, and which values of x have y values associated with them. And we can see the graph pretty much starts at -7, and it pretty much has outputs all the way up to about +7. But what's different about the endpoints is that this one, the endpoint is included. So we're going to use brackets to say that -7 is actually in the domain, as opposed to here there's an open parentheses, or excuse me, an open circle, which means the graph is really never reaching that 8.5-ish or whatever. So we have what we call an open parentheses. So we can be as close as we want to 7, 6.9, 6.99, 6.999, right? But we never actually reach 7, and that's what that basically is going there. So there's your domain, so that along the x-axis. What about the range? Well, again, that's my output, and so it looks like our outputs start at about -8.5, and there are y values associated with the graph, right? There's y values all along the way, up to about +8.5. But again, because of the closed circle here, -8.5 is actually in the range, right? -7 generates it, but 8.5 is not in the range because it's not actually generated by anything. So there is a domain and range action. What are the x and the y intercepts? Well, again, my x-intercepts are locations where we're crossing the x-axis. So we have one here, we have one here, and we have one here. I think my graph's a little off, but let's just say, for all intents and purposes, my x-intercepts are at -5, 0, at 0, 0, and at 5, 0. Okay, so there's where we're crossing the x-axis. Of course, the y-intercept, where do we cross the y-axis? Well, we are crossing it at the origin. So the origin serves as both the x and the y-intercept for this particular graph. Next question for the picture is the following statement true or false? Is f of 2 equal to -2.5? So again, functionally, we're asking when x is 2, is the y value -2.5? So when I go look at this, right, here's x equals to 2, and when I look at the corresponding y value, that looks pretty close enough to me, right? That looks like at about -2.5. So I'm leaning towards true on that. And it's negative as well, if you want to say that going on. Keeping on that vein, right, if I'm asking for f of -3, well, again, x is equal to -3, so what's the output? So when x is -3, it looks like corresponding output is 3. So f of -3 is 3. What about f of 1? Well, when x is equal to 1, it looks like our output's roughly about -1.5. And then f of 7, well, when we look at this, again, there's the input of 7, but there's really not a point allowed in it. As a matter of fact, we've said already that 7 is not in the domain. So this is undefined. Maybe it is 8.5, but if it was 8.5, right, that'd be a closed dot. So I don't know really what it is. You know, perhaps there's a jump in the function or something crazy like that happens. We just don't know. It's undefined. So there's how we find outputs given inputs. F, we're kind of reversing that. If my output's -3, what's the input? So I'll go to -3, and it looks like we have an input of 3. So x equals 3, or you can say f of 3 is -3. Okay. F of x equals 7. So again, we're talking about a y value equal to 7. So I'm going to come up here to 7, and it looks like the graph that's associated to it, you know, estimating wise, how about we say x is about 6.75, 6.8, you know, it's hard to tell exactly what it is, but that's a good ballpark figure. So f of 6.75 is roughly equal to 7. And then what about an output of -10? Well, -10's down here, and it's not in the range, right? There doesn't seem to be an input anywhere that creates that output. So f of x equals negative 10 is also undefined because it's not a range value that we have. And then a couple more questions. For what x values is f of x less than 0? So for this particular graph, what we end up having is we're talking about when is y equal to 0. So we're talking about stretches of domain. So essentially, when are we below, right, the x-axis? So when I look at this, starting at negative 7, we are below it, and it looks like all the way up to negative 5. So let me kind of color that in. We are negative, right, for that branch right there. So it looks like we have from negative 7 all the way up to negative 5. We include negative 7 because we actually do have a negative output, but at negative 5 we're actually equal to 0. So we're neither positive or negative, we're 0. Union, because there's another stretch, right, we're negative down here. So it looks like from 0 and all the way up to about positive 5, right, the function is also below the x-axis. So from negative 7 including it up to negative 5, and then from 0 to 5. And again, this is interval notation, right? We're talking about intervals along the x-axis where this particular action, right, we're below it, is happening. The flip side of that is for what x values is f of x greater than 0. So again, we are above the x-axis. And so again, looking at our graph, it's almost like what's left. We're positive in this area and we're positive in that area. So it looks like from negative 5 to 0 we are, and then it looks like from positive 5 to 7 we are. And again, we don't include 7 because it's not in the domain. Oops, I almost lost myself there. So that is basically the brunt of 3.2. All right, we have a picture of our function now, and we're still able to answer a bunch of questions on it. Domain questions, point questions, and that's going to be a really big challenge for us because you notice some of these, right? This is an interval. Let me hide the answers at intervals, right? The domain's an interval. The range is an interval, right? The values where I'm negative, the values where I'm positive are intervals, but everything else, right, they're actually points. All right, they're points on the graph. So x-intercepts are points on the graph. Y-intercepts are points on the graph, right? That is a point on the graph, true or false. We're finding points on a graph. So be aware of that. That's going to be really big in 3.3 when we get there because we're going to be constantly having two types of answers. Answers that are points and answers that are intervals. But that pretty much wraps that up. We've got some more issues, obviously, in 3.2, but I'll cover those in another video coming soon.